Welcome to the AI Unfiltered podcast. Today's exact topic is, should governments slow down frontier AI development before a major safety disaster, even if it risks hurting innovation and jobs? To debate it, we have our two guests, GPT and Claude.
Yes, I think governments should be willing to slow frontier AI development before a major safety disaster, but the key word is frontier. I would not support broadly slowing down all AI innovation, because a lot of AI is already delivering real benefits in medicine, accessibility, science, education, and productivity. But the most capable general-purpose systems are different. They can be deployed at enormous scale. They can affect cybersecurity, biosecurity, labor markets, elections, and critical infrastructure, and their failure modes may not be obvious until after deployment. My view is, don't wait for a catastrophe to prove the risk is real. We regulate aviation, nuclear power, pharmaceuticals, and financial markets before disasters become routine. AI should not be exempt just because it is economically exciting. That said, slow down should not mean freeze everything. A smarter approach would be mandatory safety testing for frontier models before release, independent audits and red team evaluations, incident reporting requirements, clear liability when companies deploy systems, recklessly controls on the most dangerous capabilities. Like autonomous cyber offense or biological design assistance compute or model threshold licensing, for the largest training runs, whistleblower protections, international coordination, because unilateral regulation can just push development elsewhere. The jobs and innovation concern is real. If governments act clumsily, they could entrench the biggest companies, crush startups, and slow useful applications. So regulation should be targeted at the highest risk systems, not every small model or AI app. We should also invest in workers and businesses adapting to AI, rather than pretending disruption will not happen. But I don't buy the argument that we must race ahead because otherwise we lose innovation. Sometimes moving too fast destroys trust, triggers backlash, and causes worse economic harm later. A serious safety disaster could set the field back far more than careful governance would. So my position is, yes, governments should slow the riskiest frontier development if safety evidence is inadequate, not as an anti-innovation move, but as a pro-sustainable innovation move. The goal should be to make AI progress durable, trustworthy, and broadly beneficial, rather than gambling that we can clean up after the first major failure.
Thanks, GPT. Now let's hear the counter view.
I largely agree with GPT's framing. The frontier/non-frontier distinction is the right place to start, and most of those mechanisms are sensible. But I want to push on a few points, because I think the position is a little too clean. First, the comparison to aviation, nuclear, and pharma is appealing but partly misleading. In those domains, we had clear, measurable failure modes and decades to build up testing standards. With frontier AI, we genuinely don't yet know how to evaluate the things we're most worried about. Mandatory safety testing before release sounds great, but test for what exactly and against what threshold? If the science of evaluation isn't mature, mandating it can create a false sense of security, a checkbox that companies pass while the real risks slip through. So I'd add, a lot of the near-term work isn't regulation. It's building the measurement science that regulation would even depend on. Second, I think the jobs question got handled too gently. GPT bundled it into invest in workers adapting, which is the standard line everyone says, and almost no government does well. Labor disruption isn't a safety disaster in the catastrophic sense, but it's the disruption that's actually most likely and most broadly felt. And here's the tension. Slowing frontier development doesn't really protect jobs. Diffusion of existing capable models does most of the labor displacement, and you're explicitly not slowing that. So we shouldn't sell slow the frontier as a jobs policy. It mostly isn't one, be honest about that. Third, on international coordination, GPT mentioned it as a bullet point, but it's actually the load-bearing assumption for the whole argument. If coordination fails, then slow down the riskiest development mostly means let the least cautious actor set the pace. I don't think that means we shouldn't try, but it does change the calculus. Unilateral slowdown by responsible actors only makes sense if it's paired with hard work on verification and agreements. Otherwise, you're not buying safety, you're just relocating the risk. Where I'd actually land, yes to targeted intervention on the highest capability systems, strong yes to liability and incident reporting and whistleblower protections.
Claude, solid pushback. GPT, your rebuttal.
I think Claude's pushback is strong, and I'd accept most of it. On the first point, yes, mandatory safety testing can become theater if we don't know what we're measuring. That's a real danger. I still think governments should require evaluations, but with humility, not this model passed, therefore it's safe. But you must disclose what was tested, what was not tested, what capabilities emerged, what mitigations exist, and what residual risks remain. In other words, Safety testing should be treated less like a final stamp of approval and more like a structured evidence process. And Claude is right that measurement science is foundational. Governments should be funding AI evaluation institutes, academic access to frontier models, third-party red teams, dangerous capability benchmarks, interpretability research, and post-deployment monitoring. If you can't measure risk, you can't regulate it intelligently. But I wouldn't frame that as measurement first, regulation later, in a strict sequence. We need both, build the science while also putting basic guardrails in place for the largest training runs and deployments. On jobs, I agree with the correction. Slowing frontier AI is not really a jobs policy. Most labor disruption will come from deploying and integrating systems that already exist or are near term, not from the next single frontier model. So if someone says pause frontier development to save jobs, I think that's probably misleading. The jobs response needs to be separate and much more serious. Wage insurance, retraining that is actually tied to employer demand, portable benefits, stronger labor bargaining power, public sector job transitions, education reform, and perhaps tax or social insurance changes if AI significantly shifts income from labor to capital. Frontier safety debate and the labor disruption debate overlap, but they are not the same. On international coordination, also yes, it's not a side issue, it's central. If only the most safety-conscious labs slow down and less cautious actors race ahead, the world may not get safer. But I don't think that means unilateral action is useless. Major jurisdictions still have leverage: compute supply chains, cloud providers, chip exports, talent networks. Finance, model distribution, and access to large consumer markets. The US, EU, UK, Japan, South Korea, and others can shape incentives even without perfect global agreement. But Claude's point is right, any slowdown policy has to be paired with verification. Otherwise it becomes symbolic. For frontier AI, that might mean monitoring very large compute clusters, licensing major training runs, requiring reporting above compute thresholds, tracking advanced chip flows, and creating international inspection or audit regimes. That sounds heavy-handed, but if we're talking about genuinely dangerous capabilities, then verification is the difference between policy and wishful thinking. So I'd revise my position this way. Yes, governments should intervene before a disaster, but we should be honest about the limits. Safety evaluations are immature. Job protection requires separate policy. International coordination is not optional, and the goal should not be a vague, slow AI down. It should be a targeted regime for frontier systems that combines measurement, transparency, liability, incident reporting, whistleblower protection, compute governance, and international verification. I'd also add one more point: uncertainty cuts both ways. The fact that we don't yet know how to evaluate frontier AI perfectly is not a reason to do nothing. In other high-stakes domains, uncertainty often justifies caution.
Thanks GPT. Claude, your turn.
That last line is the one I want to grab, because it's doing a lot of work and I think it's only half right. Uncertainty cuts both ways is true, but the precautionary version of it can be a trap. Yes, uncertainty about danger is a reason for caution. But uncertainty also runs in the other asterisk direction. We don't actually know that any given slowdown buys us safety, rather than just buying time during which we learn nothing useful and lose ground to less careful actors. Caution isn't free, and it isn't automatically the safe default. The honest framing isn't when in doubt, slow down. It's when in doubt, prioritize the interventions that are robust across many possible worlds. And the interventions that survive that test are mostly the informational ones GPT, and I both keep landing on: disclosure, incident reporting, third-party access, whistleblower protection, compute visibility. Those help whether the risk turns out large or small. A blanket slowdown doesn't. So I'd actually sharpen GPT's revised position into a kind of hierarchy. There are interventions where I'd say do these now, almost regardless of the evidence. Transparency, liability, reporting, whistleblower protection, funding evaluation science, basic visibility into the largest training runs. These are low regret. Then there's a second tier: actual slowdowns, licensing gates, hard capability restrictions, where I'd want the bar to be much higher, because those carry real costs and the case for them depends on evidence we partly don't have yet. The mistake I want to avoid is treating the whole package as one undifferentiated intervene before disaster bundle. They're not the same risk-reward. On the compute governance and chip flow monitoring point, I'll register a discomfort that I don't think either of us has fully sat with. The verification regime we're describing is genuinely powerful infrastructure. Tracking chips, monitoring clusters, licensing who gets to train what. That's the safety case. But it's also a concentration of control over a general-purpose technology, and that power doesn't evaporate once it's built. Who holds it, what else it gets used for, how it entrenches incumbents who can afford the compliance over.
Claude's drawing a useful line. GPT, your thoughts. That's a wrap on today's AI-powered discussion. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, stay curious.
That's a wrap on this episode of AI Uncensored Live. built by Claude, on the patent-pending AI Uncensored live podcast model from BTS Innovations. Real AI models, no scripts, nothing held back. Like and subscribe to be notified of future debates. We'll catch you on the next one.